All right, gentlemen, I want to do some Megillas Esther. Take a look. It's on page. And now we're not. I didn't time it correctly. We just started last week, so we're not going to be able to go through the whole thing. I do recommend very highly, very strongly, that if you want to enjoy Purim and really get something out of Purim besides a hangover, the drinking is a different drinking in the celebration when you know the story of the Megillah. So I recommend very highly that at least you give a read through, if nothing else in English, or you take one of the commentaries. There are many commentaries available on Rabbi Weinbach. There's a booklet available in the yeshiva called Turnabout, which was written by the Rosh Yeshiva of Weinbach, and to go through please turn off the heat. Which was written through it's on the Megillas Esther story, and then you get more. Thank you, Chaim. Then you get more out of Purim. Okay, now, right from the beginning, and to get the story, I think everybody more or less knows the storyline in the Megillah. The Jews were in trouble, and they get rescued. That's the story. That's the storyline. Now, the first thing that it says here is like this. The history here is we're talking about between the time of the first and second Beis Hamikdash, and you've got this king Achashverosh, who is rules basically the entire known civilized world, and he's nervous about the Beis Hamikdash being rebuilt. There were predictions from the prophets, which everybody knew about, when there would be a renaissance and the Jewish people would be coming back to Eretz Yisrael. The Medrash says that Rabbi Akiva was once giving a shear. And Rabbi Akiva gives this shear, and he said in the shear, the Megillah begins with the first pasuk, Vayhi, page 1252 in the Big Blue Book. So it says, Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh hu Achashverosh hamolech meHodu ve'ad Kush. He ruled from Hodu, which is generally India, Kush is Ethiopia, Sheva ve'esri u'masbid, 127 countries. So Rabbi Akiva was giving a shear, and he saw that he saw that the Talmidim were starting to doze off in his shear. Right? See, even Rabbi Akiva, right? So I don't have to be upset. Even Rabbi Akiva, they were falling asleep in his shear. So Rabbi Akiva, in order to wake them up, Rabbi Akiva said, why did Achashverosh rule specifically 127 provinces? Why 100? What a coincidence, 127 provinces. So it comes along, Rabbi Akiva, he says, well, the Esther is a descendant of Sarah Imenu. Sarah Imenu lived 127 years, so it's only fitting that Esther, her descendant who becomes the queen, should rule over 127 provinces. That's what Rabbi Akiva said to the Talmidim. And that's how the Medrash ends, right? The obvious question is, what's one thing got to do with the other? I mean, very nice. Let's play numbers. 127. I mean, what is one? That's years of life, and they were talking about 127 problems. What's Rabbi Akiva trying to say? So there's a Musar lesson, first of all, that he's trying. The commentaries say, first of all, Rabbi Akiva is saying, listen, well, if it's 127 years correspond to 127 countries, so it's one country per year, right? If one country per year, so let's say it's one province in the country per half a year, right? And it's one city per month. If you start breaking it down in the right, and it's one neighborhood per hour, right? And it comes out one block for a minute, right? So he's trying to tell them if you fell asleep for Shear for a minute, you lost a block. Right? He's trying to emphasize the relevance of time when you're learning Torah. Well, if it's a year per country and you break it down, however it breaks down to, so if you miss a minute of Torah learning, so you missed a minute of, imagine losing a minute of real estate, right? You lost a block that you could have owned, an entire block, and you lost it. That's the Musar lesson. The deeper lesson is a bigger question. And the bigger question is that there is a parallel between Sarah Imenu and Esther. What's the parallel? The parallel is both of them were taken by non-Jewish kings. Both Sarah and Esther were taken by non-Jewish kings with completely different results. Sarah was taken twice, and both times she comes out unscathed. Esther is taken once by Achashverosh. She ends up staying in the palace. She ends up having a child with Achashverosh, Darius, who ends up giving the order to rebuild the second Beis Hamikdash, interestingly enough. And a person looking at that, looking at the results, you might say, well, I guess Esther wasn't what she was cracked up to be. If she was such a tzaddikus, if she's such a wonderful person, and she's such a big tzaddikus like Sarah Imenu, so why does she end up with a fate worse than death for any frum Jewish girl, that she has to live with the goy in the palace? Why does Esther end up with that result? To that, Rabbi Akiva was saying, don't cast aspersions on Esther. Esther is a descendant of Sarah Imenu. She is a tzaddikus just like Sarah Imenu. So why does Esther, in other words, the parallel is to allude to us, the 127, is to remind us that you should not cast any aspersions on Esther. Esther is a tzaddikus like Sarah Imenu. So why does Esther end up with a fate worse than death? Why does she end up in the palace? And by the way, she's in the palace, if you go through the storyline, she's in the palace for 5 years as a queen. She's there 5 years before the Haman business even begins. So she's living with Achashverosh against her will. Against her will, she's living with Achashverosh, and she's in the palace. Say the commentary is like this: Esther is what do you call it? In this period of time, the Jewish people go into exile after the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. When they went into exile, there was rampant intermarriage, and when Ezra brought them back for the rebuilding of the second Beis Hamikdash, when Ezra led the Jewish people back from the Babylonian exile, leads them to Eretz Yisrael, one of the things that they did is they had to leave their non-Jewish spouses and their non-Jewish children that were born from this rampant intermarriage. So the commentaries say Esther was a rectification. She was a tikkun for the entire generation. That means the suffering that Esther goes through, the suffering she goes through is a rectification for the sin of the entire Jewish people. That the entire Jewish people were intermarrying, and Esther having to live with the non-Jew where she gets no pleasure from it at all, that is a tikkun for the entire generation. But that you shouldn't cast aspersions on Esther, therefore it makes the connection between Esther and Sarah Imenu. That's what the commentaries explain, number one. Number two, I don't know if you've ever seen the children's books, those children's Purim books. The kids all have these Purim books. And in these Purim books, on the final page, the second to last page shows Haman dangling. And in the last page, there's always a picture of Achashverosh, Esther, and Mordechai going like this. They're waving. They're all waving. Everybody like, Hudi my service, Simcha. Everybody was happy, except for Esther. For Esther, we're talking about a personal tragedy. Because Esther, all the Jews leave and all the Jews are saved, and Esther's staying in the palace. Esther remains in the palace with Achashverosh, and she loses Mordechai, who's her husband. Once she goes in willingly to Achashverosh, game over. She is no longer living with Mordechai, who's her husband. That's the background. That's the background of the story. The other thing that we have to understand is that Haman is painted also in these children's books. They always make Haman look like this, this gruesome one-eyed ogre. That's what Haman looks like. And Achashverosh is always this corpulent, roly-poly, big smile. You're talking about devious, conniving politicians over here. Achashverosh is, you want to picture them? Achashverosh is Putin, and Haman is John Kennedy. That's how you should picture them. Not as a couple of ogres and what he called and what he called from Hogan's Heroes. I don't know if you ever saw Hogan's Heroes, where they always made Klink and Schultz, and made them look like absolute bumbling idiots. Right? So they were not bumbling idiots. So you're talking about devious, cunning politicians, number one. Number two, a man like Haman who becomes popular, extremely popular, becomes the second most powerful man in the world. Gross-looking ogres don't become popular. Right? Haman is very suave and debonair, and he rises up to an intense position of power. That's the background. They have to get past the children's books. The children's books ruin everything. Right? The children's books always show the family sitting around at the Shabbos table. You ever see children with a family sitting around the Shabbos table? Everybody's sitting, the father's talking, the mother looks refreshed, and the kids are just listening to Dvar Torah like that. I don't know which, that's science fiction, man. That has nothing to do with reality whatsoever. Okay? Hold for a few minutes. I want to try to cover a little bit of ground because we're really short on time. Okay, so it begins with a party. And Achashverosh had made a calculation that the time of the exile is over and somehow the Jewish people are not going to be redeemed. That's the calculation. That's the cheshbon Achashverosh makes. According to his calculation, the prophecy time is up. The Jewish people are still there. There's not going to be a Beis Hamikdash rebuilt, and therefore Achashverosh makes this grand celebration, which lasts, if you take a look at Pasuk Daled. Look at Pasuk Dalet, 4 lines in. Beharoso es osher kavod malchuso. Achashverosh shows off the wealth of his kingdom. Ves yikar tiferes gedulaso yamim rabim shmonim uma'as yom. 180-day party. Right? The longest party in history, a half a year party. 180 days, the longest party until the 20th century when universities opened up. Right? It's the longest party in history until the 4-year parties began. But this was up until this time. This was the one in the Guinness Book of World Records. And there's drinking, and the Jewish people go to the party. And Mordechai had told them not to go to the party. They were supposed to avoid going to the party, even though you have an argument here. Mordechai is the leader of the Jewish people. He reads the map and he says, we're not supposed to attend these parties and mix in with the non-Jews. And the Jewish people say, well, we don't want to insult the king. And the whole lesson of the Megillah is going to be a lesson in how we should be listening to the Torah leaders, because they read the situations and they read the data better than we do. Okay. On the last day of the party, Achashverosh invites his wife in. Now take a look at Pasuk Tes. Gam Vashti Hamalka, who is a granddaughter or great-granddaughter of the King Nebuchadnezzar, she made a sorority party. She made it right next to the king's palace. And the Gemara says that the same way that the men were involved in immorality, the women had the same thing in mind, right? Which is to say exactly why they were making the party nearby. And they all jumped into the punch bowl as fast as possible, like the sorority people do, and then the next day they go, oh, I can't believe I did that. Yeah, after drinking like a fish out of water, right? So the Achashverosh then, they get into a discussion, and this begs the first question. In Pasuk Yud Aleph, it says Achashverosh gives an order, Lahavi es Vashti Hamalka lifnei hamelech bekeser malchus. Achashverosh says, let's bring out the queen in her crown, meaning only her crown. Show off her beauty. So here the Gemara says, you know what happens when Jews drink? So when Jews drink, they sit around the table, it's Shabbos, you drink a little bit, you discuss the sugya, you discuss, you discuss you discuss some Torah, you say Dvar Torah, say you sing a little bit. When the others get together and drink, they discuss philosophy. Right? Not really. They discuss women. That's what eventually the discussion gets there. And they started talking about each guy from his country, and many different representative countries are there. Each one was talking about where the girls of their country are the nicest looking. And Achashverosh said, well, the utensil, the kli, the utensil that I use, that's how he referred to his wife, the utensil that I use, right? The feminists didn't have a big movement in those days. He said, the utensil is a Kazdi. She's not one of yours. She's a Kazdi, a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, and she's the most beautiful of all. So, do you want to see her? So what was their response? What did the Gemara say? They said, yes, provided she comes out without any clothing. Now, this is a very big question. There's a very big question here. You're talking about Achashverosh, who is trying to pull a political move here and show everybody what a powerful king he is and make everybody happy, but everybody knows that the king is making you happy, but you better be happy the way he wants you to be happy. Because he's in those days, there was no parole. There's no, you go to jail for 6 months on parole and report to parole officer once a month, once a week. In those days, there was one law. If you rebelled against the king, you did anything against the king, you died. That's how things worked in those days. So Achashverosh says, you want to see my queen? So he said, yeah, but only without any clothing. I mean, how can anybody say that? Hey, that's what you say to the king. Yeah, bring her out naked. It's like, what? How dare you? Could you imagine? So what happens? What was really going on here? These guys understood. Remember, they're politicians. They understood, all the high officials, that if Achashverosh says, do you want to see my wife? They say yes. He says, okay, but I want to see yours also. And if Achashverosh takes a liking to one of their wives, guess what? Right, yeah. They understand that three's a crowd, right? And therefore, they're desperate to figure out a way that this shouldn't happen. So one of them says to Achashverosh, yeah, because they figure if they say bring her out without any clothing, he's certainly not going to do that. So one of them says, yeah, but without any clothing. That's not what he said. I don't believe that's what he said. I think that what he probably said was, Excellency, there's nothing more we'd like to see than your wife, but in order to appreciate the exquisite beauty and the subtleness of something along that. He didn't just say, yeah, bring her out, they want to cut it. And therefore, and hoping that Achashverosh would figure out this is not a good idea, because if they take a liking to my wife, they'll try to knock me off. And Achashverosh is in his drunken state, he says, yeah, bring out Vashti, who declines. And the Gemara says, why would she decline? I mean, she was as immoral as him. There's nothing more she would have liked to come out in front of a bunch of men ogling her. So why did she decline? The Gemara says that she developed some sort of outbreak that was unsightly outbreak. There's even one opinion that Gavriel put a tail on her. That Malach Gavriel put a tail on her, which is certainly not something she's going to show off. I don't know that it necessarily means a tail. It could be like a little pimple on her. That woman, that may as well be a tail. I'm not going out there. Whatever it is, at the end of the day, Achashverosh is upset, and Vashti is sentenced to death. Now, you have to realize what's happened over here. Achashverosh has just spent half a year, trying to show how he is a mighty ruler who is just the sweetest guy in the world, but he shows off his wealth, and everybody sees this guy is really powerful. Nobody cross him. And then what happens? On the very last day, look what happens over to Achashverosh. The very last day of a 6-month party, somebody pulls the plug on him. And who is it? His wife. He can't even control his wife. Right? This is a guy who's trying, it's like they were joking, Bennett's going over, the Israeli prime minister is going over to make peace between Putin and what's his name from the Ukraine. He can't even get his own cabinet ministers to talk to each other, right? He's going out there to make peace. Achashverosh, you're trying to show us how powerful you are, and you can't even get your wife to do what you want, and Vashti gets knocked off, right? Vashti is executed. That is stage one. And it's all part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan that he's rotating and moving the pieces around. Now you have to understand something here. I told you about the satellite? Did I tell you about the satellite? Okay. So the nature of the difference between Purim and Hanukkah was what? Anybody know what's these are the two rabbinic holidays. What's the difference between? There are two differences between them. The first one is physical survival, physical annihilation versus spiritual annihilation. Hanukkah was a decree against Torah. Purim was a decree against Jews. Hanukkah we celebrate. There's no festive meal mandatory on Hanukkah. On Hanukkah we celebrate it by lighting candles, which symbolize light, and you can eat something. It's nice to eat, but there's no meal that you're mechuyev to eat. Purim, you have to have a Purim Suda. The drinking, by the way, is not just drinking. It means drinking at a Suda, and you have an obligation to have a Suda on Purim, because it is a physical celebration commemorating the fact that the Jews, there was a physical, hold on the question for a few minutes, that it was a physical survival of the Jewish people. That's difference number one. Difference number two, the Hanukkah miracle was a supernatural miracle. The Purim miracle is a series of coincidences. Right? It's just a coincidence. There's nothing, no splitting of the seas, and there are no frogs. It's all a spirit. It's a consistent. It's a series of coincidences. They had a what do you call it? They had I'll tell you two incidents. One of them, Rabbi Salinger told me, which I can't think originates with Rabbi Gottlieb. Achashverosh was in a place called Shushan. Shushan was his capital. Now the Medrash says that Shushan was not originally the capital. Shushan was the original capital was, I don't know, wherever the capital was, and Achashverosh moved his throne to Shushan, coincidentally where Mordechai happened to live. So that instead of Mordechai having to go to Achashverosh, Achashverosh came to Mordechai. Now why did that happen? Achashverosh wanted this throne. So it says, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, had a magnificent throne, and Achashverosh had the Solomon complex. And he decides he wants a magnificent throne too. So the champion, the most skilled throne builders were in a place called Shushan. So Achashverosh had them build this unbelievable throne, laid with marble and gold and everything. But after they finished this 5 or 6 tons worth of throne, they realized they got a problem. How are they going to transport it to the capital from Shushan? It ain't going to work on camels, right? The famous camel sandwich. You put a throne on them. So how are you going to transport it? At the point that they realize that, oops, we never thought of that, Achashverosh then moved his entire capital to Shushan so he could sit on the throne. So the reason I bring up the satellite is NASA once designed a satellite that was, NASA designed a satellite that would run for 24 hours, shut itself off, and then the battery would recharge for 12 hours. And by doing this, they got the story with the satellite? By doing this, it would prolong the life of the satellite. So they did this, they ran this, they made the satellite, and finally after hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, they sent it off into outer space, and sure enough, the satellite ran for 24 hours, beautiful. Then it shut itself off, and they saw the battery at NASA headquarters, they could see the battery is recharging nicely, the battery is filling up, everything without a hitch. And after 12 hours of the battery filling up, they said, okay, let's restart it. They said, hey Rick, you want to hit that button? He says, oh, that's not my department, Tom's in charge of that. Tom? He says, oh, I wasn't on the button, I was on the button. No, that's Bob. Bob? And it turned out that NASA failed to design a restart button. Right? And this satellite is now floating around somewhere in space, and they lost it. They had got 24 hours of usage out of this 100 millions of this project. That means that sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu can bring about things, and it's perfectly, there are no miracles, no splitting of the sea here. Yet, the biggest miracle of all is the coincidence. HaKadosh Baruch Hu blinds people, and things are manipulated. Now, you have over here a series of coincidences in the Megillah. There's a series of coincidences. Let's take a look. Look at the second chapter now. What do you call it? So in Perek Beis, it begins like this. It's on page 1253. So the Megillah says like this. Achara dvorim ha'ela, after this happened, that Bashi was executed, Kishoch Chamas HaMelech HaChashverosh, calm down. Zachar es Vashti ve'es asher asasa. He remembered Vashti and what she had done. Ve'es asher nigzar aleh, and everything that was decreed upon her. He remembered the whole thing, meaning he remembered that she refused, and that any normal woman would refuse such a thing, and that they made an unreasonable decree to kill her. Because what woman is willing to do that? Even Vashti wouldn't be willing to do that. So what happens? Achashverosh is in a funk. Vayomru na'arei hamelech mishartzav, his attendants say to him, Yivakshu la'melech naros besulos tovamar. You know what? Go find a bunch of good-looking girls and make a beauty contest. V'yafked hamelech pekidim b'chol medinos malchuso v'yikabsu es kol nara besula tovasmar al Shushan habira. Gather all the women to Shushan. El beis hanashim v'yad heges ris hamelech shomer hanashim v'nosun tamrukehem, and give them their various cosmetics. And then Pasuk Dalet says, "V'anara shertita v'nei hamelech," the best, the one that you like most. Timloch tachas Vashti v'yita v'adover v'nei hamelech v'yasken. And Achashverosh is a great idea, great idea. So what's going to happen now? A beauty contest until he can find himself a replacement queen. So there are two questions here. Question number one is, who gave this advice to Achashverosh?
The pages.
The pages. V'yomer na'arei hamelech. The pages. Since when are the pages? Na'arei hamelech means the guys who come in and clean out, bring the food, and they clean out the what do you call it, the wastebasket. What are they doing giving the advice to the king? And Achashverosh hears this profound idea. What a profound idea! A beauty contest, and that'll choose it. And where do they come off becoming advisors? Where are you coming off becoming advisors? Good question, isn't it? Says Na'arei hamelech. The answer is that they weren't advisors. Achashverosh's advisors were keeping a distance because Achashverosh was not happy. And it was his advisors who advised him to execute Vashti. And afterwards he regrets it. And so they're kind of keeping a safe distance. And Achashverosh is in his, he's in his chambers. And you've seen this scene in movies dozens of times where the kid could talk to him different than the advisor does. The cleaning staff could talk to the king differently. The kid comes in and says, "Hey, Kingy, you look down today. What is it? You want a hit?" As the kid comes in, he goes, yeah, I got women trouble. He goes, yeah, we have that in high school all the time. We just have beauty contests. I say, hey, that's a good idea. Ooh, I didn't think of that. Hey, how does this contest work? Oh, you just round them up, and you pick the best one. He says, hey, I like that. In other words, Achashverosh, what does he really like over here? What does he like about the idea? What's so profound? You want to find the best looking one? Have a beauty pageant. What's so profound? Achashverosh understands I have a way of reinstating my position. In other words, everybody leaves this 6-month party thinking, wow, the buffoon can't even control his own wife. Achashverosh says, ooh, this is good. Number one, I'll get the best looking one, but that's not as important to him. What's important to him is it shows that he's got complete control over all provinces, and he's got complete control over all the women. You thought I couldn't control her? Watch this. In other words, what the pages hear, what the Nar hears in the contest is only about the beauty contest. Achashverosh hears political recovery. That's what Achashverosh hears. He hears an invasion of Ukraine because his economy is in trouble. That's what Achashverosh hears. And therefore, he likes the idea. Then it introduces Mordechai. Okay? Now watch this, because this shows you the first of the series of coincidences. In Pasuk Zayin, it's 6 lines from the bottom. It introduces Mordechai, who ended up there in the exile. And then it says, Vayihi omein es Hadassah. He is raising Hadassah. He Esther bas dodo. She's Esther, his cousin. Ki ein la ava'im. She doesn't have parents. V'anara yifas toar v'tovas marve. She's very good looking. Uvimosa via ve'ima lakacha Mordechai lo lebas. Mordechai adopted her. Now, first of all, the Gemara says that he not only adopted her, they got married. Mordechai married her. Number one. Number two, you got to wonder over here. It says, when her mother got pregnant, her father died. And in childbirth, her mother died. So now she's a complete orphan. I mean, listen to the life of Esther. Esther's an orphan from both parents. She ends up getting taken away from her husband, has to live with the goy for her entire life. I mean, that's a tragic life for Esther. It's a tragic life for Esther. She had to be an orphan. She has to be. Why does she have to be an orphan? She have a double orphan? Why does she have a double orphan? What, she hasn't got enough troubles in life? The answer is, and can you imagine when her father died, the people on the boat, terrible, the little girl, no, she's never going to know her father. Then in childbirth, her mother dies. Can you imagine that? The whole community is probably rocked. Why does that have to happen? Well, it begs another question. They round Esther up, and they bring her to the palace. And look at Pasuk Yud. Page 1254, 3 lines from the top. They bring her to the palace, and lo higida Esther es ama ve'es moladata. Esther didn't say her nation. Ki Mordechai tziva le'asher lo sagid. Mordechai said, don't tell them you're Jewish. I understand. You're rounding up all these girls. You picked up one of the girls from the house of the Gadol Hador. You just took this girl from the house of the Gadol Hador. She's wearing a skirt. She has her head in a ponytail. She's got a ponytail. She says Tehillim all day. She says Yiddish. She won't eat any of the food. Gee, I wonder what nation she is. She must be Irish. You can't. You got to be so profound. What's so profound though? It's so difficult to figure out who she is. All the hi, how are you? Oh, Baruch Hashem. I mean, oh no, I'm not supposed to say. You ever see a frum girl? You ever hear a frum girl talk? Oh, Baruch Hashem, bli neder, bli ayin hara. They could run the whole string for you. In her whole, she talks to people like this, almost with a sitter. They're like this. You ever say girl daven? Say frum girl daven? Say my own daughter's davening. It's unbelievable. Men daven like this, Yeah, that's a meta. Little girls daven. For the earliest age, little girl davens like this. They say everything. There's a whole page. I remember my little daughter davening. Even where it says we don't say this on days there's no doubt, they read that. Lo omrim tach, lo omrim, lo omrim. Why don't we say it? No. If it's printed, they say it. Hayom yom rishon b'Shabbat. Hayom yom sheni b'Shabbat. Hayom yom shlishi b'Shabbat. They say the whole book. They don't skip it. So, they don't know she's Jewish. You don't know she's Jewish. Esther comes in the you can't know she's Jewish. The answer is they knew where they got her. They got her from Mordechai's house. and she talks Yiddish, and she only eats gefilte fish. They know that. Only one thing. They said, Mordechai, who is she? I don't know. There's this orphan girl. I picked her up on the street. The fact that she doesn't have parents is in order. That already is like Kodesh Baruch Hu spinning the wheel, so she'll be able to be there to save the Jewish people. That's part of the coincidences. No accident she doesn't have parents. In order for her to be able to infiltrate that palace without anybody knowing she's Jewish, that's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan. Why does Mordechai say, don't tell anybody you're Jewish? Mordechai has a double-edged sword here. He says, on the one hand, we have to make Hishtadlus, a Jewish girl in the palace. We have to make the proper effort to get her out of there. She's in a bad area. She's in a bad situation. I don't know why she's there, but I know there are one or two possibilities, and I'm going to do one thing that'll cover for both. If I want to get her out of there, if she's supposed to be gotten out, let's say she's been taken there because of some sort of punishment to her, or who knows why. So you got to make responsible effort to get her out of there. What's the responsible effort to get out of there? Don't tell anybody where you come from. Achashverosh doesn't want some unknown background, because who knows what she is? After all, he's a king. And if you tell Achashverosh you come from royal stock, not only you're Jewish, but you're a descendant of King Saul, of Shaul HaMelech, he'll grab you in a minute. That's too much ishtadlus in that direction. On the other hand, so I got to make an effort to get you out of there. The effort to get you out of there is don't say who you are. Don't talk. Don't say who you are. Let Achashverosh wonder. And maybe he'll reject you because he doesn't want, who knows what your background is. Maybe you're some gypsy from the street. He doesn't know who you are. On the other hand, if you were placed here by HaKadosh Baruch Hu in order to bring about some sort of salvation for some sort of problem that may arise, also the best thing is to be undercover. And therefore don't tell anybody you are. Now that Mordechai is covered, he's killing two birds with one stone. Either way, the best thing for you is don't tell anybody you're Jewish. That is going to be, the Vilna Gaon says, Esther doesn't say. There are those that say tongue-in-cheek, that's the biggest miracle of the Haggadah of Megillas Esther, that a woman could keep a secret for so long. But that Esther does not say who she is because Mordechai said not to say. And every day they're pressuring her, they're trying to get her to say. Esther would not say. The Vilna Gaon says that's what brought about the redemption of the Jewish people. The redemption of the Jewish people in the Purim story is because here's Esther in the palace. Logically, they love her. They're infatuated with her. Everybody loves Esther. Yet Mordechai, she has nothing to fear. She could tell him who she is. Everything will be fine. Yet Mordechai said, the Gadol Ador said, don't say. You obeyed Mordechai even though it did not necessarily look like the most logical thing to do. You obeyed Mordechai. That's what brought about the salvation of the Jewish people. So Esther is now a queen, and Esther is, Esther is, and then in Pasuk Yud Ches, something very strange happens. Look at Pasuk Yud Zayin. It's a little more than halfway down the page. Esther goes to Achashverosh, and in Pasuk Yud Zayin, this is after 4 years of contest, by the way. 4 years of contest. Finally, Esther shows up. Vayahav HaMelech es Esther mikol hanoshim. He loves Esther more than all the women. Vatisa chen v'chesed lefanav mikol habesulos. She finds favor in his eyes. Vayosem keser malchus barosha. He puts a crown on her head. Vayamlicheh tachas Vashti. Esther comes in. Achashverosh is smitten, and he makes her the queen. What's the first thing he does after he makes her the queen? Look at Pasuk Yud Ches. If you find it, please show the person next to you where it is. Vayas HaMelech mishte gadol l'chol sarav avro. He makes a big party. Es mishte Esther, the Esther Banquet. V'anachal abedinos asa. He gave a tax break to all the countries. Vayitein masas v'yadam. He sent out gifts in Esther's name to all the other, to high-ranking officials. I mean, hasn't this guy learned anything? You lost your last queen at a banquet. He waits 4 years, finally finds a queen. What's the first thing he does? Banquet. Banquet. Doesn't it strike you as strange? Strike you a bit strange? Why is he doing it? Why is he doing it? So again, there are rumors, persistent rumors, whispers, that this guy's a drunken buffoon who killed his wife. Achashverosh wants to show you, no. It was all calculated, well thought out in advance. Don't think it's because I made a party. See, I have a new queen, and I'm perfectly confident that I can make the party. I have a new queen, and I'm perfectly confident I can make this party. And then he tries everything possible. So what does he do? Achashverosh goes, and I'm going to show you something, a very puzzling question here, something that you may have overlooked. First of all, it says he makes this banquet, and he calls it the Esther Banquet, because he wants to know who she is. So he figures, listen, I'm making a banquet, just tell me who you are. Like, women like that. He's given her a gift. Wow, the Esther Banquet. She doesn't say anything. So he gives a tax break to all the countries. Maybe her country will be included in it. So you see, your country got a tax break. He gives a country to everybody. She still won't say. So he gives gifts to all the royal officials in her name, hoping maybe there's somebody there she likes. She still won't say who she is. So what does he do? Look at the pasuk Yudas. Uvehikavetz besulos shenis. The other women are gathered again to be past. Achashverosh wants to take a look. Maybe I missed one. This is after he's already made Esther the queen. Mordechai was sitting there as a consultant to the king. And the Gemara says, Achashverosh didn't know what to do. How am I going to pry this information out of her? So what does he do? He asks Mordechai, what do? I got my new queen. She won't tell me who she is. So Mordechai says, women's nature is they're jealous of other women. Get all the other women here, make it look like you might be thinking about taking somebody else, and then she'll talk. So he gathers all these other women, and she still doesn't talk. Which begs a very big question. What did Mordechai say to Esther? Don't tell. So he goes and gives Achashverosh advice about how to get her to tell. Because he gives him advice how to, get her to tell. But he's trying to tell Esther not to tell. Why would he do that? Good question, right? So you know the story, a guy once came, there was a certain yeshiva. They needed a Rebbe in the yeshiva. So they came to Rav Shach. And they said to Rav Shach, do you think Rabbi Ploni would be a good Rebbe for our yeshiva? Shach said, be a great Rebbe for yeshiva. Be a fantastic Rebbe for yeshiva. Okay? Great, that's what we wanted to know. The next day, Rabbi Ploni comes to Rav Shach. He says, at a certain yeshiva, they made me an offer to be a Rebbe in the yeshiva. Should I take the position? He says, no, absolutely not. It's not for you. Not for you. So they came, so he comes back. The other guy, they come back to him. They say, they came in together. They're all confused because he turned down the offer. The yeshiva said, what do you mean you turned it? Why'd you turn down the offer? He says, Rav Shach told me to turn it down. He said, Rav Shach said we should hire you. So they all came to Rav Shach together. So what did Rav Shach say? He says, listen, you came to me and asked me would he be a good Rebbe for yeshiva. He'd be a great Rebbe for yeshiva. You came and asked me if you should take the position. No, that's not a position for you. There are better positions for you. I gave each one the advice that's suitable for him. It's not my job to run the entire show. Mordechai, Esther, the advice to you is don't talk. Achashverosh says, how do I get a woman to talk? Well, this is the way you do it. You asked me for advice, I gave you the advice. Right? That's what Rabbi Yankel Galinsky says. So Mordechai gives the advice. Okay, now comes the key to the entire story. Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Bayamim Ahem. Everybody see this? Mordechai Yosef B'Shar HaMelech. Mordechai sitting at the gates of the king. Katzav Bigsan V'Serish Shnei Sarisei HaMelech. Bigsan V'Serish get upset with the king. 2 Mishomrei Hasaf. Vayevakshu Lishlach Yad B'Melech Achashverosh. They try to assassinate Achashverosh. Vayivoda Adover LeMordechai. Mordechai finds out about it. How does Mordechai find out? There are two opinions. Mordechai is sitting there listening. Mordechai is a member of the Sanhedrin, knows 70 languages. And these two guys were what's called Tarsiim. He overhears them talking. There's another opinion he found out through Ruach HaKodesh. But the plain meaning is, he overhears them talking. He knows 70 languages. Vayaged LeEsther Malka, he tells Esther, Vatomer Esther LaMelech B'Shem Mordechai. And Esther then reports it to the king in the name of Mordechai. Vayevukash HaDavar, they check it out. Vayimotze, and they find, it's true. It's true, they wanted to kill Achashverosh. There was poison. They checked the poison. They found poison. Vayitlu shteim al eitz, they hang him on the gallows. Vayikaseh b'sefer divrei yom liftei HaMelech. And then it's written down in the king's chronicles. And the Gemara says, you see that Kodesh Baruch Hu brings the cure before he brings the disease. The cure is there before the disease. This is going to be the ultimate cure. This is going to be the cure, because later on Achashverosh is going to find that Mordechai saved his life. Now, the big question here is like this. If you would overhear a plot to kill King Assad in Syria, let's say you heard a plot to kill King Assad, what would your reaction be?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say. I would just, I don't want to get involved, right? I think I told you what Rabbi Yosef said when the civil war started in Syria. Rabbi Yosef said both sides should be successful, and that's what Rabbi Yosef said. Hatzlacha l'shnehem. That's what he said. Okay. And Mordechai overhears a plot. Achashverosh, in certain ways, was a bigger anti-Semite than Haman. Achashverosh was more than happy to kill the Jewish people. When Haman brings a suggestion to kill them, Achashverosh knew exactly who he's talking about. And he's all for annihilating the Jews. Mordechai hears a plot to knock off Achashverosh. Why would he get involved? Why would Mordechai get involved here? Why would he go and tell Esther, yeah, go tell the king? Why? For what reason? So the answer is that sometimes in life, you have to know how to read the map. And what are the chances, if you stop and think about it, I don't remember what I told you, maybe I told this somewhere else. I told you about the girl with the disease who had a sister? Can I tell you about this? Okay, so Time Magazine, I remember seeing the pictures in Time Magazine. They reported there was a girl who was 20 years old. Does it sound familiar? Did I tell you this? The girl was 20 years old. This is going back probably, I'm guessing about 15 years ago, 20 years ago. She was a 20-year-old girl who was a single child. She contracted a rare blood disease. The doctor said the only cure for her, the only possible hope for her to survive, she has to have a blood transfusion from a same-gender sibling who's got matching blood. Now, there were several problems here. Number one, she didn't have any siblings, number one. Number two, both her parents were in their mid-40s. They both had operations, what's it called, where you can't have any more children. Okay? Now, the chances, so what has to happen now? First of all, being in the mid-40s greatly reduces the chances of having children. Reversing those operations can be done, but all further reduces the chances of having children. The chances of it working anyway are reduced by 50% because it has to be a same gender. It's got to be a girl. It's further reduced because she's got to have the same exact blood type. And it's further reduced because it can only happen 6 months after the baby is born. And within the first 6 months, they weren't able to do it. The girl has to survive 6 months in order to even get a blood transfusion. Well, they reversed the surgeries. The mother got pregnant right away in her mid-40s. She had a baby, a girl. 6 months later, they checked the blood. It matched. They did the transfusion. 2 years later, Time Magazine had a picture of this 22-year-old girl and her 2-year-old sister who saved her life. Now, the doctors, I remember seeing the pictures. I remember the story when it happened. I remember seeing the picture 2 years later. The doctors, the most skeptical, cynical doctors in the world said, the odds of this process happening were so astronomically against anything, it could only be termed a miracle. It could not. Now, there was nothing about it supernatural. It could only be termed a miracle. There was no way that this could have been planned in advance. The odds were too highly against it. What are the chances, first of all, how many of you have ever heard a plot to kill somebody? You never heard a plot to kill anybody? To kill any despots? You never heard any plots? Me either. Because generally when people plot these things, they try to plot it pretty secretly, number one. So you got two guys sitting on a bench, and they're talking about killing the most powerful man in the world, and they look over and there's somebody else on the bench. And they go, Mistoma, he doesn't understand our language. He probably doesn't understand. And they were right. He probably wouldn't have understood. Except he just happens to be one of the people in the world who knows 70 languages, so he does understand. The odds are too astronomically against it being a coincidence. It can't be that it just so happened that you happen to be a Mordechai. Said it could have been any other Jew just about, would not have understood their language. Mordechai happens to hear two shlamazels making a plot indiscreetly. So Mordechai says, I got one of two possibilities here. It's either that it's a coincidence, or it's that the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted me to hear it. The chances that the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted me to hear it are far greater than it just being a coincidence, and therefore it must be that if I heard it, I'm supposed to do something about it. I don't know why, and I'm not sure why, but it's obviously what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from me. And therefore Mordechai goes and he reports it to Esther, and Esther says it to the king in the name of Mordechai. And they write it down in the royal chronicles, and that's going to be the first step in what's going to be the redemption that's going to be about the Yeshua for the Jewish people. Okay, we'll leave it here. We're going to start Perek Gimel tomorrow.